Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report. This is Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Chinegu. And we're in the second day of the ninth month, in the 16th year of Chunki. And guess what? I'm back. I'm back at my old spot. And we got the background and everything. Praise God. I spent 6 weeks in Taiwan. And I also made a little side trip on the way home. But I am home now. And I just walked in a couple hours ago, just in time for a little snack and a little nap. And I'm here. I think everything is set up the way I needed it, but well, anyway, we'll find out. But anyway, today's Wednesday. Today's Wednesday, so we're going to do a little bit more of the OSDP that we started last week. Last week we did the family pledge. Last week we did the family pledge. And just, I guess, maybe, shall we review? Well, no, I don't think we need to review. Let's just go ahead with the next chapter. So after doing the family pledge, all the 8 verses last week, this week we're going to start looking at the reasons to study the original substance of divine principle and see what that is all about. Okay. So here, it's kind of small, isn't it? Let me see. Second, if I can get this larger, it's at least 100%, and maybe even a little bit more. Okay, there we go. I kind of don't really want to try to do a slideshow. That always takes up more bandwidth than I seem to have. So I'm just going to do it like this with the slides showing on this side, if you don't mind. So, number one, resolving all the problems in the real world. And that's quite a statement. But I think you'll see that actually it is justified, because all the problems in the real world have a common origin, and that is the fall. And so if we're able to go back and fix that original problem, the place where everything went wrong, then by extension, we find that we can solve all the problems in the real world, including the problems with individuals, with families, with nations, and with the environment even. And so that's why studying this is important, because then we can bring the world back to where it should have been in the first place. So the view of human life is, first of all, the problems in today's world. First of all, the problem in the view of a human life, mind and body, and the conflicts and confrontation and struggle. These are reflected now in the individuals, families, societies, and nations. So the conflict that we see in individual human beings between good and evil, between the mind and the body, are all reflected in the families and societies and nations around us, because in the end, it's not just God that works in concentric circles. That's the way God built this universe, and so everything works that way. And so it all depends on the individuals that are involved. So what kind of families you have, what kind of nations you have, and what kind of world we have. So if we can fix the situation with individuals, right? If we can fix the situation with the conflict between mind and body of the individuals, then we can have long-term solutions to the conflicts, both on the conflicts among individuals, going all the way up to nations. You know, and this is why I kind of well, I was not just kind of, but quite skeptical when President Trump came out and said, "Okay, here is something like, what did he say, everlasting peace or something like that in the Middle East between Gaza and Israel, between Hamas and Israel." Well, unless you fix the individuals who are involved, you're not going to have everlasting peace. And I think we're seeing that. The peace is kind of holding together more or less, but clearly it's not going to be everlasting. but at some point or another, and perhaps it may be after President Trump completes his term, but at some point or another, those two are going to start fighting again and start killing each other again. And I said, to have everlasting peace there, you have to have intercultural and international blessings, which I think is quite true. In fact, I'm quite certain it's true. That's Father's solution to conflicts. But that involves, what does that involve? That involves a unity of mind and body, and also it involves a changing the individual. Because today, Hamas young people are not so interested in being blessed with Israeli young people. We have today we have family issues with divorce, infidelity, and the breakdown of the families. Divorce is not the only way in which families break down. So infidelity and also just children, the conflict between children and parents, resulting in a complete breakdown, a complete breaking of the relationship between children and parents. So we studied last week in the family pledge that the family is the basic unit of the kingdom of heaven. So if the family then is not holding together, if the families are breaking down, if they're breaking apart, if there's divorce, if there's infidelity, then obviously you're not going to have the kingdom of heaven. So somehow we have to solve that issue in order to make this world the kingdom of heaven. Okay. And I hope you have a chance to study the True Love Hormone lecture that the King is giving. It's been given mostly now in Korean and in Chinese for the most part. There's one lecture he gave in English, and I think I have a link to that somewhere. Perhaps I'll put that in the description below this lecture on YouTube anyway. When these lectures these King's Reports every day are broadcast on Rumble and Twitch, but then they are made private on Rumble immediately after the broadcast, and Twitch, I think, only maybe sticks around for a couple of weeks. So I've been uploading these King's Reports to YouTube, to my personal channel, Timothy Elder. And so perhaps I'll put, if I can find that link, I'll put it in the description below, because I think that lecture I find quite instructive. It's a little bit out of the box, but give it a chance and listen to it a couple times, and I think it'll begin to grow on you. Okay. All right. So the family issues, but that's what it's about. And it's amazing how much effort and Chongsung actually that sincerity and dedication that the king is putting into helping people have families that are as successful as his own, having marriages that are as successful as his own. So anyway, so the family issues, so morality among teens, where especially in high school or even before high school, many children think that sex is all right, and then there's no reason to wait until marriage before experimenting with sexual intercourse. So immorality among teens and young adults, homosexuality, and same-sex marriage. I know homosexuality is a controversial topic, and we're supposed to kowtow to the homosexual lobby, but it's clearly against God's design, and it's not just something that God is decreeing because he likes to be a dictator, but because homosexuality undermines and contradicts God's design. And people who are homosexual are welcome to come to Father. He welcomes those people. He has never turned someone away because they were homosexual. But when he blessed people who were homosexual, he always blessed them in heterosexual marriages. And people who come to Father's teaching who are homosexual, I think, come to realize that they need to accommodate themselves, and somehow they need to be successful in heterosexual relationships. People may say, well, this is the way God made me. Well, no, actually not. None of us are the way God made us. None of us are, because we are sinful. And God did not make us as sinful beings. And so all of us are in a position where we need the saving grace of God, and through His Son, Jesus Christ. And now through the second coming of Jesus Christ, Reverend Sung Myung-won, our true father, Sung Myung-won. So we are not violating the human rights of homosexual people. We are simply pointing out that this is something that they need to overcome. Same as, you and I have stuff that we need to overcome in order to reach completion. They also have something to overcome, and that is their homosexual tendencies, homosexual attraction, and the practice of homosexuality. Homosexual people themselves are not an abomination, but the practice of homosexuality is an abomination before God. And so, of course, same-sex marriage and this same-sex marriages come about because people don't understand how the world was created, and people don't understand that same-sex marriages are undermining and destroying God's design, and are working against bringing about the kind of society that we all would hope for, a society of coexistence, co-prosperity, and universally shared values. AIDS, of course, when AIDS came along, I think what was it, the 1970s or 80s when AIDS first appeared or first diagnosed. Father termed it as a punishment from heaven, and I know there's a lot of reaction against that, but it is a reflection of and it is a consequence of the distorted view of sex that people have. that people have. Of course, homosexual relationships is not the only way in which people get AIDS. It can also be transmitted through blood transfusions and so forth. But fundamentally, it is transmitted, or basically transmitted through homosexual relationships. Abortion, put it simply, abortion is murder in God's law. Does not mean that we then go out and start killing doctors who perform abortions. That's absolutely not the case. But it does mean that we need to educate people about about abortion and how it is contrary to the law of God. So we want to work towards that. Okay. And abortion includes any artificial, and by artificial I mean humanly brought about by humans, any artificial ending of life of a baby in the womb, or any, after the zygote is formed, after that first cell is formed by the union of the sperm and the ovum, then any ending of that life is abortion. And so, for example, in vitro fertilization also involves abortion as well, because at least my understanding of current technology is that it's not just one embryo that's created. It's multiple embryos are created. Only one of those embryos actually gets to live, and the others are discarded. And that is abortion. And that is killing those other embryos who have a right, just as much of a right to live as you and I. Gender ideology, of course. I was standing at a Japanese train station a few hours ago, and I noticed that the trains going by, many of them had one car. There's several cars strung together as a train, right? one car that says women only. And I was thinking to myself, wow, wouldn't the Democrats in America have a problem with this? Apparently, Japanese know what a woman is. And the women only car happened to be stopping where I was standing. And I saw, several trains go by, and the doors would open, and all these, well, what to me looked like women rushing out, going to work. I was there. What time was I there? It was anyway. It was a time when people are going to work, and all these women come rushing out of that car. And I just thought, wow, well, what would a Democrat, what would one of these far left people, what would AOC have to say about this? Now, of course, the fact that there are women-only cars in Japanese commuter trains is a tragedy in itself. It reflects a tragedy. Okay, and I looked at the other cars to see how many women were brave enough to ride in the cars that were not women only. And there were some, yes, there were some. But the women only cars were jam-packed with women. And that in itself is a tragedy, actually, and reflects a deep-seated problem in Japanese society where women riding in crowded trains often experience that they are being sexually assaulted by men. But anyway, the good news is that Japanese society does know what a woman is, apparently. I was wondering what would happen if a man were in there, and I did not see any men in there. Apparently, there were no men was brave enough to venture into a women-only car. I don't know, maybe they would open the window and toss him out onto the tracks. I don't know what would happen if he were to go there. Anyway, the women-only cars, yes. Anyway, they know the difference. School violence, yes, of course. School violence in the United States often means often involves sort of kids who go, who have serious problems mentally, bringing a firearm to school and committing acts of murder with that, but also even in sort of high trust societies like Japan and Korea, there's a great deal of violence in schools, both among students, but especially between students and teachers, where and also, of course, occurs in the United States as well. And labor and management relations, where there are sort of strikes going on, and labor feels that they're being treated unfairly, and so forth and so on. So problems there, and racial discrimination, of course, not just in the United States, I would say, but people who, non-Asians or even Asians who are in the wrong country or not in their country in Asia report a lot of discrimination against themselves, both in jobs and looking for housing, in marriages, and et cetera, et cetera. International borders. Now, someone asked me, are there going to be international borders in Cheongguk? And my answer is yes, because Cheongguk recognizes private property. And if you recognize private property, then your property, right? If I buy a piece of land, then there's a border around that land, okay? And people who come into that border should ask my permission, right? You can't come climbing in my window in the middle of the night, right? That's kind of rude. And then my property, and then the next door property, okay, so someone else has that. And then a whole bunch of these properties come together and they form a village. And villages come together to form townships. Townships come together to form cities. Cities come together, and counties come together to form estates, and states come together to form nations. And then you have national borders, right? You have national borders. And just as it is with these personal properties, it's also kind of nice, probably polite, to ask for permission before crossing an international border. And so I think there will be borders. But the difference, though, is that those are borders formed from the bottom up. And right now, almost all of the borders we have in the world, all the international borders we have, were formed by conflict. Even the border between the United States and Canada, U.S. and Canada like to say, oh, yeah, we have the longest unguarded border in the world. But you know what? There were also wars that determined that border and conflict that determined that border between the United States and Canada. So, of course, the U.S. and Mexico, of course, several wars there. Just about I think pretty much every border was determined by conflict in one way or another. So that would be the difference between the international borders that we have now and the ones in Chunukuk. And also, I think, though, that the borders that we have in Chunukuk will be kind of like the state borders in the United States right now, right? So there is a border between Pennsylvania and New York, but people go back and forth every day. And if you didn't have the signs there, welcome to New York or welcome to Pennsylvania, you wouldn't even know that you had crossed a border. But there are arrangements, shall we say, that make it possible for people to go back and forth like that. And religious conflict, of course, conflict among religions. Well, that's what the Middle East is all about. On one level, between Judaism and Islam, and also among the various forms of Islam, between Hinduism and Islam, Buddhism and Islam in Southeast Asia, and so forth and so on. So all this religious conflict. And some atheists even say that we need to get rid of religion so that we can have peace, right? The Beatles song, right, about what is it? In other words, there's a song where they say, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if we would have a world without religion, so that people would not have anything to fight for," or something like that. So religious conflict. Of course, in reality, of course, religion is set up by God to help bring people back to Him. A spiritual phenomenon we don't really understand, or people don't understand the spirit world. And of course, a great deal of the spirit world is still evil spirits. And so this affects human environment. All these things that we're listing right now are the problems that we are experiencing in the world today, and problems that can be resolved through people understanding OSDP and understanding the God that is being taught in OSDP. Environmental pollution, of course, we're supposed to be taking care of God's environment, but we're not doing a very good job. Food shortages, well, on the one hand, there are people who are throwing away food in the United States. A lot of food gets thrown away. On the other hand, there are places in the world where people are starving for lack of even the most basic nutrition. Ideological issues, democracy, communism, and of course, we're dealing with that, in relationship with China and relationship with other areas where people want to set up their own power structures and use democracy, use communism as a way of doing that. And global issues and issues of philosophy, understanding existence, understanding relationships, and peace and unification issues of war, hunger, disease, and education. So all of these are the problems that we're experiencing in today's world. And those are all problems that we want to be able to resolve, and we think that we can resolve through the study of OSDP, or the original substance of the principle. So how did these problems occur then? Well, they came about by the human fall. This is why I say if we want to solve all these problems, we have to go back to the cause. And all these problems have a common cause. And that's what's amazing about it, because if we can resolve that common cause, then we can resolve all of these problems. It's not in an instant. It'll take time, because so much time has passed, and so much uh, of our life surrounds involves bad habits and so forth. But we can find the common cause, resolve that cause, then we can bring about a completely new world. So if Adam and Eve had believed in God's word and practiced it to reach completion, they would have become the true parents, and God's ideal world of creation would have been realized. Genesis 1:28. Now here, notice that it does not say if Adam and Eve had chosen, right, had freely chosen or something like that. So here again, the cause of the fall was not freedom, but rather it was that uh, they did not believe in God's word, and so they left themselves vulnerable to unprincipled love. And love is a force. It's a force. So because it's a force, it can be either good or evil. It can work for good or it can work for evil. So there's principled love and there's unprincipled love. It's a force that flows from a subject partner to an object partner, where the subject partner, in a principled love, the subject partner is living for the sake of the object partner, so as to experience love and joy. Because they fell, Adam and Eve could not become true parents. Let me just bring this down a bit so we can see more of this slide. There we go. There we go. Okay. They became false parents and formed let me get rid of that B there. They became false parents and formed a false family. So Cain and Abel were born, they were children who were born between Adam and Eve after the fall, after they were excluded from the Garden of Eden. So they could not become true parents. They became false parents and formed a false family. And the world became a world of evil on earth and in heaven. So because the relationship between Adam and Eve and God was broken, and it was replaced by a relationship between Adam and Eve and the archangel, who was now in a position above Adam and Eve, in other words, dominating Adam and Eve. Then they inherited the archangel's love and the archangel's attitude and the four fallen natures, which we will get into in chapter 2. And then when they moved into the spirit world, then they became what? They became evil spirits. They became evil spirits in the spirit world. And the same with all the people who were born after them going into the spirit world, and they became evil spirits at that time. So all the people who lived between Adam and Eve and Abraham then went into the lowest part of the spirit world, even below the rest of creation. This is the cause of the world's problems, because now they are also having give and receive with people on the earth, and causing all sorts of problems here. So because humanity is born from false parents, we cannot solve the problems of the real world. Why is this? It is because humanity that is descended from fallen Adam and Eve has lost the true God. We are born centering on Satan. And so this is why we can say, as I said a minute ago about the homosexuality, that none of us are the way God intended us to be. None of us can say, well, God created me this way. And if homosexuals use that excuse, then can pedophiles use that excuse? Some of them do, I bet. Hey, this is who I am. What are you going to do about it? All right. Well, then can murderers use that excuse? Can Jeffrey Dahmer? I don't know if you know Jeffrey Dahmer. Maybe you're too young to remember, but he went around. He was a serial killer who would go around killing women and then eating their body parts, right? And when he was caught, I think there were some body parts sitting in his freezer, or a later feast, I suppose. Can he also say, well, this is how God created me? No, none of us can. None of us can. So if homosexuals use that excuse, then everybody can use that excuse. But the reality is that none of us can use that excuse because we are all born as the product of the fall. And so we need God's saving grace. And we need to um, somehow become the people that God intended. In other words, the completion of our character and the completion of a God-centered family and the completion of the relationship between human beings and God's creation. Okay? So this is important that we are born centering on Satan. When we say we, everybody who has not received the blessing or is descended from the blessing is born centering on Satan. Okay? All right, let's go now to the next. I think we're now ready for the next slide. Okay. Oop. Okay, let's go. Okay, I think I skipped a couple there. No, I guess not. Problems in the real world, gets 25, 26. Okay, we're ready for 26. Okay. And so then how did these problems occur? When the true parent comes and performs the holy blessing ceremony for the first time since the beginning of creation, the true parent ideal begins. Completion of the ideal of creation will be accomplished. So True Father came and he began performing the holy blessing ceremony in 1960. And so that was the beginning of creation and the beginning of the True Parent ideal. And that, so the blessing that True Father performs, the True Parents now are performing, is the marriage blessing, the blessing marriage that God wanted to give to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but never could. And so this is a tremendous historical event that happens every time this blessing is performed. Every time it's performed, Satan then is pushed back a little bit more and is forced to give up a little more ground to God. And this is why after Father passed into spirit world, after he shed his physical body, Satan did everything he could to take back the families that Father had created, to take them back into his lineage. And he nearly succeeded. He nearly succeeded in doing that through Hakchahan. And this is why her sin, her crime in the failed Foundation Day of 2013 by the solar calendar is such an incredible tragedy. And this is also why the world needs to be so grateful to the second king, Hyung Moon, for reestablishing the contact with Father and opening the way for people to return to True Father's authority and to continue the blessing providence beginning in 2015 and is still continuing today. And now he's giving blessing to couples in Taiwan, which is a fantastic thing. The true parent must bring Satan to natural subjugation by fighting myriad Satans on earth and in the spirit world by means of the principle of restoration through indemnity to gain victory in each of the vertical and horizontal stages laid by the false parent. So we'll get into the vertical and horizontal 8 stages later on. Actually, it's kind of much later on, but just to give you a foretaste, the vertical stages are the servant of servants, servant, the adopted son, the child of the son or the child of the concubine, the direct son, and then the mother, father, and then God. So those are 8 stages. So these are 8 stages that were created now by the false parent, in other words, by Satan. And all of these then have to be brought, all these stages need to be brought to God's side. We'll get into this later on. Horizontal stages, individual, family, um, tribe, uh, ethnic group, nation, world, cosmos, and God. Those are the 8 horizontal stages. So only then can true parents be manifested to complete God's ideal of creation. And that was supposed to be the declaration of Foundation Day. And eventually, Foundation Day was declared, but not on the date that Father had first established, but later on. So it was accomplished in stages later on by the second king. So Satan's world began with Adam and Eve committing the fall through illicit sex, in other words, through adultery, and becoming false parents centered on Satan. So the world of God's ideal creation comes about centered on God and in accordance with the true parents' teachings of OSDP, absolute sex. This is why absolute sex is so important. Love requires discipline, and sex requires discipline. Because sex is a powerful, powerful tool. Satan right now is using it, or has been using it, to create his world of evil. But God's original intention for sex was that this would be an important part of the God-centered husband-wife relationship. Centering on the true parent, all of the world's problems will be resolved, and the world of eternal ideal of the original creation will be accomplished. This is the most important reason for studying the original substance of divine principle. The king has made the point that in the New Testament, that Jesus did not marry, Paul did not marry, and Paul even says that, well, marriage is only, he implies or kind of says indirectly that marriage is only for those people who can't keep from committing adultery. So if you can go through your life celibate, then that's the way you should go. He says that's what I'm doing, and that's what you should do too. Except that if you commit adultery, then you're going to go to hell and burn. So it's better to marry than to burn, is basically what Paul says in the New Testament. So from that, then it follows that sex is not a very good thing, right? Sex is not a good thing. This is something that you're supposed to resist. So, of course, that begs the question, well, why does sex exist in the first place? But the New Testament really does not have a theology of marriage or a theology of sex. True Father does. True Father does. And some of you may remember how sort of embarrassed people like Reverend Kwok were, especially Reverend Kwok, when Father started talking about concave and convex. Hint, hint, hint. What's concave and convex? Oh, that. That's how he started. But then he became more and more graphic from there. And the people who came to Father's teaching especially from a Confucianist background, were incredibly embarrassed by all of this. And they tried to get Father to stop talking about sex, and even after a while they started accusing him of being senile and stuff like that. But sex is a central part of God's design. And this is why Father talks about absolute sex. And when the term absolute sex first came about, I know there was a lot of resistance because people say, well, if you search Google for absolute sex, you come up with pornographic sites. Well, yeah, I mean, because Satan has taken that term. And so we need to take it back, right? Absolute sex is not supposed to mean what Satan says it means. We need to redefine that. There was a time especially in the 80s, when some conservative professors in South Korea refused to have anything to do with Father's organizations, with the Professors World and Peace Academy, for example, because they would say, wait a second, any organization with the word peace in it is a communist organization. So therefore, PWPA must be a communist organization. So yeah, in the 70s and 80s, that's true. Any organization with peace in its name was, in fact, a communist organization. Communists were using that word to advance their cause. The peace sign, the sort of the inverted and broken cross that they invented in the 1960s. They called it the peace sign, and they had the peaceniks and all sorts of peace rallies, and they were all communist inspired. But Father was working, of course, to take that word back from the communists. And I think he has succeeded to a large extent. I don't know of anyone now who still insists, who still thinks that any organization with the word peace in it is going to be a communist organization. Praise God. So that battle has been won, it seems. All right, so absolute sex. All right, and let's see here. Let me see if I can get rid of this ribbon at least. All right, quick sex system. Okay, no, that's not it. Collapse the ribbon. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, that's better. So how did these problems occur? Now let's look at what kind of being is a fallen human being. A fallen human being is a contradictory being, right? And Paul, of course, talks about this in Romans. I don't have my Bible here. Well, is that a Bible over there? Yes, it is. Okay. Hold on a second. Let's not just pass these over. Let's go to the verses. We go. Okay, I guess that's Romans 7, 17. Okay, yeah. Now then, it is no more I that do it. So let's see, is that where we start? Okay, let's start with 15. Okay, let's start with 15. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that I do. So what I want to do, I don't do. Right? I don't do what I want to do. Instead, I do the things that I hate. So he's talking about a contradiction within himself. This is Romans chapter 7, and we're looking at, we just read 15. Let's continue. If then I do that which I would not, notice, if I do those things that I don't want to do, I consent unto the law that it is unto the law, consent unto the law that it is good. Now then, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. So I'm not the one that doing these bad things, but rather it's the sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not. So I know the things that are good. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what is good. I can tell what is good, what is evil. But I do things that are evil, and how to perform that which is good, I find not. I cannot find within me how to do those things that are good. For the good that I do not. For the good that I want to do, I don't do. But the evil which I would not, that I do. So the evil that I don't want to do, that's what I'm doing. Now, if I do that I would not, it is no more that I that do it, but the sin that dwelleth in me. Again, 20 and 17 are similar verses. And I find then a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, with the mind, I myself serve the law of God, but with the flesh, the law of sin. So he says, yeah, we have this contradiction, and only Jesus Christ can liberate me from this. And let's take a look at 1 John, shall we? 1 John. Okay. Okay. John 1, 8 and 10, 8 to 10. If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins. He's faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. And back to Romans, to Romans, to Romans chapter 3, chapter 3, 10 and 11. And as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth, there is none that seeketh after God. And then First Thessalonians, let's see here. Okay, maybe I'm right there. First is Colossians. Here we go, Thessalonians 5, 17. Okay. Pray without ceasing. Okay. Good idea. Pray without ceasing. But we can, well, some people take this in the wrong way, I think, pray without ceasing. I know one person, well, she may be watching, but bless her heart. It seems that sometimes that all she does is pray. But work is also prayer. Work is also prayer. We can always pray as we work or even through our work. Prayer is not necessarily getting down on your knees and putting your hands together and closing your eyes and saying words that you hope that God will receive. Work itself is prayer, and also going on a weekly date with your husband is prayer, or with your wife is prayer. Doing one-on-one training with the children is prayer. Everything is prayer. So pray without ceasing, but understand that prayer can be understood in a very wide context. Okay. Anyway, let's take a look at this chart we have here. Okay, so we have mind and body, and there's give and receive between mind and body, centering on desire. And desire itself is good, right? If we didn't have desire, then we would not have the desire to be good. We would not have the desire to come closer to God. And so desire is good if it is centered on God's will. But desire becomes evil if it is centered on the selfishness and centered on the individual. Okay. So, but here we see that there are two forces at work here. That is the evil mind. We have the evil, what Father calls the sashim or evil mind, and the ponshim or the original mind, and they are pulling us in two different directions. And here also the body is sometimes working to do evil actions, sometimes working to do good actions, and also there's we are being pulled in two directions there. And when we, based on the original mind, we do good, then we are able to, or go towards good, and we are able to perform good actions that produces joy, produces happiness. But if we do evil, then we create misfortune and create evil actions and sorrow that comes from that. Okay. All right. Okay. I think I need to bring this down just a bit. Okay, yeah, 200%. Okay. All right. Okay. So how did these problems occur? What kind of being is a fallen human being? Is spiritually and physically ignorant. So he became spiritually and physically ignorant. And I've said, that it should not have taken us hundreds of thousands of years to invent or to discover electricity, right? Cavemen basically, um, basically they are sort of products of the fall. They are human beings who were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Anthropologists that talk about how there were different types of humanoids that intermarried and so forth, or were living together side by side, and there was a lot of interaction between them, and a lot of sort of mixed offspring between them and stuff like that. So I don't know exactly when God breathed into Adam and to give him a spirit self, but whatever that was the beginning of humanity, in God's providence. But then that humanity lost God's blessing and became spiritually and physically ignorant. And we see in Genesis, where after the fall, God clothed Adam and Eve in furs, and so that was their level. Then they did not know enough to be able to clothe themselves. So that was a physical ignorance, not knowing how to take care of themselves. Because until then, and before the fall, God had been taking care of them, where their environment was taking care of them. They had all that they needed for eating and everything else. But now, after the fall, human beings became completely ignorant, and they could see the lightning. Right? I mean, it wasn't just Benjamin Franklin who looked up in the sky and say, "Wow, yeah, look at that lightning. Gee, I wonder if that's something that we can harness." Why did it take hundreds of thousands of years for someone like Benjamin Franklin to come along and figure out how to bring lightning down in a way that it would contribute to human society? Humans are ignorant in spirit and in intellect, and ignorant of God, ignorant of true parent, the spirit world, ignorant of the proportion of responsibility, the purpose of creation, ignorant of true family, ignorant of sin, and ignorant restoration through indemnity, ignorant of all those things. And that is where we are today. And that is why God is educating. He has educated us, and then through us, he wants to educate the rest of the world. We're going to come pretty soon to that list of 6 things that Father says have to be in place in order for us to have a world of unity and peace. Number 1, everyone in the world needs to know God with certainty. With certainty. Not believing in God, okay, that's not enough. But to know God with certainty. To know God with certainty. Do you believe in God? Do you know God with certainty? Do you know God? And also, people have to understand the true parents. And right now, with this whole thing with Hakchahan in Korea, there's a very sort of a distorted picture of true parents being given to the world, unfortunately. But that'll all work itself out. But it's going to take some time, unfortunately, in the spirit world. All right, etc. And of course, we'll talk about portion of responsibility. We'll talk about purpose of creation and true families and sin and all that. Okay, all that is coming. All right, let me find my cursor here. Okay. So here, all right, so fallen human beings, mind and body, having given and received action here, and there's physical ignorance and basis of the ignorant of the basis of the physical universe, ignorant of the laws of nature. So of course, ignorant about lightning, ignorant about, even germ theory, for example. Germ theory, can you imagine? Just a few hundred years ago, not even maybe that. Yeah, well, I guess maybe 300-400 years ago, people were not aware that germs cause diseases. And so during the 14th century, when the Black Death was going around Europe, people were trying to figure out what is causing all this? Where does it come from? And they decided that it was smell, the smell. And so maybe you've seen those photographs of physicians during the Black Death wearing these masks that have these long beaks in them, long beaks on them, right? What they would do was they would put, I think, flowers or other nice smelling things into those beaks, and that fragrance of those flowers and the other nice, smelling things was supposed to protect the person wearing the mask from the disease or whatever it was, okay, from this death. Of course, today that seems ridiculous to even an elementary school child today would know that that is ridiculous. Even a first grader, even a kindergartner would look at that and say, "What on earth are they doing? Don't they know about germs?" Well, they didn't. They didn't. That was how ignorant they were. Even just, I would say, even how long was it ago when they finally? It was relatively recently that they figured out that, hey, you know what? There are these things that we cannot see with our naked eye, but these are organisms that are actually going into our body and are causing us to have these diseases. They finally figured that out. Why did it take that long for us to figure that out? Right? Because of our separation from God. That's why. And there are all kinds of crazy things that were mentioned in the past. You go to even, let's say, the beginning of the 20th century, all right? There were things about uh, things about racial differences in the size of the head, for example, that were supposed to, anyway, all sorts of crazy science, or pseudoscience. And I'm sure that, I'm sure that the things that we believe to be true, or some people believe to be true today, will be proven false in the future, and science will continue to develop because as time goes on, we are developing this knowledge of God's universe more and more. But we still have a long way to go. There are still many things about the human body even that are not well understood. Okay. So that's the physical ignorance, but there's also spiritual ignorance, the reality of God. There are many people who deny the reality of God. But does God not exist because some people will deny it, right? No. If some people say, oh, well, the Bible is just a myth, and religion is just a myth, does that make religion a myth? No, it doesn't. It's still reality. God is reality. The spirit world is a reality. God's will is a reality. God's Shimjung is a reality. It's just that people are ignorant of that reality. And people are also ignorant about life in terms of the origin of life, the purpose of life, the afterlife. And also people are ignorant about good and evil. They think that good and evil can be subjective. Everybody has their own truth, some people say. No, well, but there is an absolute truth. They like to use the example of the elephant, right? Where a bunch of blind people are touching different parts of the elephant, right? And the one that touched the tail says, "Oh, an elephant is shaped like a rope," and another person touching the leg says, "Oh, the elephant is shaped like a pillar," and so on and so forth. And one touching the ear is saying, "Oh, the elephant is shaped like a fan," this kind of thing. And they say, well, look, they all have a part of the truth. But as the king has pointed out, the flaw with that argument is that the person giving that example is seeing the elephant. He's seeing the absolute and total truth. He's seeing that it says, okay, there's an elephant. But people are looking at it different. But he understands, the person giving the example understands that there is such a thing as the elephant. In other words, there is such a thing as absolute truth. Now, maybe we see different parts of the absolute truth, but God's absolute truth exists. And that's important. We cannot just have our own truth. What was Hitler's truth? Hitler's truth was that it is okay, it is good to exterminate Jews and homosexuals and people who are invalids. That was his truth. Is that okay? No, of course not, because that goes against. Why is it not good? Why was Hitler evil? Because he went against God's absolute truth. He went against God's absolute truth. Exterminating people like that is never good. It is never good. In North Korea today, what is Kim Jong-un has his truth, right? There are tens of thousands of people in political camps. Why? Because they went against Kim Jong-un's truth. But no, that cannot be. That's not the way that it should be in this world. Okay. So we need to understand God's truth. All right. That's our hourly session for today, and we will continue next week. Okay. And God bless Godspeed. May his kingdom come quickly.